It took a really, really long time compared to most concussions I hear, which was really surprising for me because I always thought I'd be resilient, I'd be the one to get back on the ice after a week. But that didn't happen, and that was a big bummer. So my first concussion, I was way over there near the far blue line over there, and then we were basically in the corner getting the puck. I was winger, so I was trying to get it out of the zone, and then what happened was it was in the corner and I was going for it, and then I got hit from behind and my head went straight into the boards, head first, right here on the top of my head, and that just basically knocked me out cold.
It came in from behind. It was a bad hit, and literally people in the stands were like, "Oh my gosh," and we're all going, "Penalty!" And I was like, "Oh, it was a bad hit and everything else," but I just assumed like everything else, he'd be fine. He probably got his bell rung, and then the coach called me over, and that's when Connor came over and said, "I've got dizziness, I've got here," I think he had bells in his ears, I can't remember, but definitely a headache. He wasn't definitely there.
10 years ago, a concussion was a stinger, a blurred vision, shake it off. Today, it is something that the coach and parent realize that it is a serious injury, and coming back from it takes a long period of time, just as any other injury would.
Concussion is a minor head trauma to the body or head that results in transient neurological symptoms. Neurological symptoms include headache, dizziness, difficulty concentrating, sleep disturbance, irritability or emotional symptoms, visual symptoms. So every concussion is different, so the recovery is not something that we can predict. On average, high school athletes and below typically recover in 14 to 21 days.
So he was off the ice for the first concussion for about a month. And honestly, I did not think it would take that long. Everyone was like, "Oh, as soon as they're symptom free, they go back." And so most of the coach was surprised it took that long. I was surprised it took that long.
Almost immediately after I took the test the next day, it was really bad compared to my baseline. Like all my stats, my speed, all that, it was just shot. So we had to do a bunch of balance tests, also had a headache, so I took a bunch of nerve blockers and medicine to get that back on track. And then really it was just a waiting game.
So the initial evaluation and treatment of concussion is important to go through a stepwise evaluation to make sure they don't have something more serious than a concussion and need imaging. The initial management is we give parents permission to treat their athlete like a mushroom, put them in a dark room and feed them and water them. There's an initial brain rest phase where the more they do, the worse they feel. That usually is just a handful of days or less, and then we need to gradually introduce stimulus, school activities when they become completely asymptomatic. So the criteria to return to sports after concussion is not a time-based criteria, it's a symptom-based criteria.
I did have a concussion when I played, and unfortunately it was at a morning skate, and it was an unfortunate incident where I was clipped in the back of my skate, and I basically flipped over and hit my head on the ice. And it was a process to recover from that. Well, some of the symptoms were headache and dizziness, and just not feeling right. And I think that it took me a while, probably took me a good month before I really felt like I was back to normal. And as painful as it was for me to sit out of playing at that point in my professional career, it was the right thing to do.
Just educating parents and coaches and players is huge, because they see it and they'll start speaking up, or they'll start holding that player out because they realize how serious it is. You just have to realize how serious a concussion is.
A lot of people do not want it to be a concussion, and they try to convince you that, oh, it's not, it's just a headache, it's gonna pass, and that you really should put your foot down and be like, no, I think I should get this checked out. I think it's a headache, we need to make sure, and not let it just sit there in the back of your head and be like, oh, is it maybe a concussion or not?
It's so important when there's any doubt or any question at all whether someone player has a concussion, that they need to be sat down and they got to go through the right process for the healing. And
Now, the message is for an 8U player compared to an 18U player, you would think would be different, but to me, the brain is still developing at all those ages, so our message is the same. If you think an 8U player has a concussion, you better be going through the same protocol as an 18. The 18U, the only difference is that 18U is going to want to get back out there on the ice. That 8U player will say, I'm hurt, I will be able to sit, it doesn't hurt me, but that 18U player may not give you the answers that are honest. The problem is, you don't see, a bone sticking out or blood, and that if it was a leg injury, you definitely set them out, but you don't see it in the brain.
all coaches want to do well, and we want our children to do well, and our players to do well, and our teams to do well. But the health of our players is of the utmost importance. And I think that the long-term health of the player is so important. And no young coach should hesitate in sitting someone down if they think they have a concussion.